Imagine standing on a windswept plateau in southern France about 40,000 years ago, where the freezing wind cuts through your reindeer hide wrap like a knife. You are a Homo sapiens hunter, tall and lean, possessing a body designed for long distance trekking across the open plains. But you are not alone in this wilderness, because sharing these valleys is another species of human that is built like an absolute biological tank. Out of the freezing missteps a Neanderthal, a heavy-duty cousin of yours who has spent over 200,000 years perfecting the art of Ice Age survival. He stands about 5 feet 6 inches tall, but he weighs a solid 180 pounds of dense bone and explosive muscle. If you met him in a modern sports arena, you would be looking at a natural middleweight champion with a neck wider than his skull and a barrel chest designed to warm the freezing air. The question of who would win in a head-to-head clash is not a modern video game fantasy. It was a real, gritty struggle for resources that played out across the hills of Europe and Asia for thousands of years. For over 10,000 years, these two distinct human species coexisted, hunted the same game, and sought shelter in the same limestone caves. They were both apex predators at the very peak of their evolutionary game, meaning that whenever their paths crossed, the stakes were life and death. To understand who would walk away from a prehistoric fight, we must look at the tape and compare the physical builds of these two legendary survivalists. Let us start with the raw physical power of the Neanderthal. A close inspection of a Neanderthal skeleton reveals a frame built to withstand incredible amounts of blunt, force trauma. Their collarbones were longer, their rib cages were wider, and their joint surfaces were massive compared to ours. Their limb bones were thick and bowed, which acted as natural shock absorbers when wrestling large animals. Every muscle attachment site on their bones is prominent, indicating they carried huge, powerful muscles that could deliver explosive force. Biomechanical models suggest that a Neanderthal's upper body strength was at least 30% greater than that of an average modern human. Their hands were wide, with thick fingers capable of a crushing grip that could hold down struggling prey or shatter bone with a heavy stone. Their stocky build was a direct adaptation to the freezing climate, reducing their body's surface area to prevent heat loss in accordance with Allen's rule. This compact shape also gave them an incredibly low center of gravity, making them nearly impossible to wrestle to the ground. If a Neanderthal grabbed you in a close, quarter struggle, the fight was essentially over before it started. Their faces featured a prominent mid-facial projection that made their noses look extremely large, which served to warm and humidify the cold, dry air of the tundra. They also possessed massive heel bones and short lower leg bones, which made them incredibly efficient uphill walkers, but very poor sprinters. This heavy skeletal design required thick, dense bones to support the tremendous force generated by their massive leg muscles. Now look at the Homo sapiens fighter of the same era. Our ancestors were taller, averaging around 5 feet 8 inches, with long, slender limbs and narrow hips. This skeletal design was built for energy efficiency and long-distance endurance running, not for raw, explosive strength. Our muscles were smaller, our bones were thinner, and we lacked the heavy skeletal reinforcement of our Neanderthal cousins. In contrast, Homo sapiens had a high, narrow chest and a well-defined waist, allowing for greater torso rotation while running or throwing. Our ancestors also possessed a prominent chin, a skeletal feature completely lacking in Neanderthals, which helped absorb stress in the jaw bones during chewing. Sapiens' skin was also packed with sweat glands, allowing us to dump heat during long pursuits in the sun, whereas Neanderthals relied on panting and cold adaptation to regulate temperature. But carrying less muscle mass was actually a brilliant survival strategy in the resource-poor landscapes of the Ice Age. A male Neanderthal required up to 4,000 calories a day just to keep his massive muscular engine running. In contrast, a Homo sapiens hunter could easily survive on just 2,500 calories a day. When winters got tough and herds of game migrated away, the Neanderthal's massive body became a burden. They could starve to death, while the leaner, more efficient sapiens survived on tiny rations of seeds, roots, and lean meat. It was a classic battle between a gas-guzzling muscle car and a fuel-efficient hybrid. Beyond raw muscle, we must look at the brain power driving these physical bodies. It is a common myth that Neanderthals were dim-witted cavemen who could barely grunt. Their brains were actually larger than ours on average, measuring around 1,500 cubic centimeters compared to our 1,350. However, the organization of their brains was fundamentally different from ours. Neanderthal brains had much larger areas dedicated to vision and motor control, which was necessary to coordinate their massive bodies and see in the low, light environments of northern latitudes. Homo sapiens brains, on the other hand, had larger frontal lobes, the area responsible for complex decision-making, planning, and social organization. So while a Neanderthal might have had faster reaction times and sharper vision, a sapiens had a greater capacity for strategic thinking and abstract communication. Now let us examine the weapons that these two fighters brought to the battlefield. For thousands of years, both species used very similar stone tools, using the levallois technique to flake sharp edges from flint. Neanderthals relied heavily on this technique, a complex stone knapping method that required them to shape a flint core beforehand to strike off a single, predetermined flake. While this technique showed incredible spatial intelligence, it was highly wasteful of raw materials and time consuming to execute. But when it came to hunting and combat weapons, their designs diverged in a way that changed history. The Neanderthal weapon of choice was a heavy, thick, shafted wooden spear tipped with a broad stone point. These spears were designed for thrusting, meaning they had to be held with two hands and jammed directly into the flesh of a woolly mammoth or a giant bison. To use this weapon, a Neanderthal had to get close enough to feel the warm breath of their prey, putting themselves in extreme danger. We know they did this because Neanderthal skeletons show a high frequency of healed fractures, particularly in the head, neck, and limbs. Their injury patterns are almost identical to those of modern professional rodeo athletes who get thrown off bucking bulls. They were literally wrestling giant animals for their dinner, surviving broken bones and concussions through sheer toughness. Homo sapiens, however, developed a completely different philosophy of warfare: kill from a safe distance. They invented the spear thrower, also known as the atlal, which was a carved piece of wood or antler that hooked onto the end of a light dart. This simple tool acted as an extra joint on the hunter's arm, increasing leverage and allowing them to launch projectiles at speeds over 80 miles per hour. With an atlal, a sapiens hunter could stand 40 yards away behind a rock and throw a lethal dart with enough force to penetrate a mammoth's hide. They did not have to risk their lives in a physical struggle. They just had to throw, retreat, and wait for the animal to bleed out. Homo sapiens also revolutionized tool making by using bone, antler, and ivory to create needle, sharp points, sewing needles, and barbed harpoons. The introduction of bone needles allowed our ancestors to sew fitted, multi-layered clothing that trapped air and kept them warm during freezing nights. Neanderthals, on the other hand, simply draped animal hides over their shoulders, fastening them with wooden pins or simple ties that let in drafts of cold air. Fitted clothing allowed sapiens children and elders to survive the harsh winters, lowering infant mortality and increasing the average lifespan of the group. Later, sapiens developed the bow and arrow, allowing them to shoot rapid-fire projectiles from hidden positions. If these two human groups met in a conflict, a Neanderthal with a thrusting spear would be at a massive tactical disadvantage against sapiens armed with throwing darts. The Neanderthal would be hit multiple times before he could even get close enough to swing his weapon. Range always beats raw power in open combat. The difference in weaponry dictated entirely different tactical strategies. Neanderthals were masters of the forest ambush. They relied on thick tree cover and broken terrain to sneak up on animals, using their explosive leg power to leap out and deliver quick, lethal thrusts. This worked perfectly when Europe was covered in dense forests, but the landscape changed as the climate cooled. The forests shrank, replaced by vast, open grasslands where animals could spot predators from miles away. In these open steppes, the Neanderthal ambush strategy became obsolete. Homo sapiens thrived on the open plains because they were built for cooperative pursuit hunting. They would form long lines, using complex communication to drive animal herds into natural traps, muddy rivers, or narrow ravines. Sapiens hunters also built camps on ridges to monitor the migration paths of mammoth and reindeer herds across the valleys. They would coordinate their movements using sound signals or smoke, allowing different bands to intercept the herds at strategic bottlenecks. Neanderthals tended to stay in the valleys, waiting for animals to come to them rather than actively predicting their long-distance movements. They would jog after their target for hours, using their superior sweating ability and endurance to run the animal into a state of heat exhaustion. In a tactical clash, sapiens could use their superior tracking skills to follow Neanderthal movements for days, choosing the perfect moment to launch a surprise attack. If a group of Neanderthals managed to ambush a sapiens hunting party in a dense forest, the sapiens would be crushed with terrifying speed. But on the open grasslands, sapiens would easily circle the slower Neanderthals, maintaining distance and using ranged weapons to wear them down. This brings us to the ultimate weapon in the sapiens' arsenal, the numbers game. Neanderthals lived in very small, isolated family groups, rarely consisting of more than 15 individuals. They spent their entire lives with the same few relatives, which led to a very small genetic pool. Recent genetic studies of Neanderthal DNA show high levels of inbreeding, which weakened their immune systems over generations. Because their groups were so small, the loss of even one or two adult hunters during a bad winter could doom the entire clan to extinction. Among Neanderthals, evidence suggests that women and even children participated directly in the high-risk hunts, exposing the entire group to injury and death. This meant that a single failed hunt could result in the death of reproductive, aged females, causing a permanent drop in the clan's population. Homo sapiens, by contrast, lived in larger bands of 30 to 100 people. Sapiens groups also practiced a division of labor, where some members focused on hunting while others specialized in gathering plants, making clothing, or preparing food. More importantly, these bands were connected to other clans miles away, forming vast tribal networks that shared resources, information, and mates. They traded high-quality stone and decorative shells over hundreds of miles, creating social bonds that stretched across continents. Sapiens networks also allowed for the rapid spread of new ideas and technologies, as a clever tool design invented in one valley could be copied and traded across hundreds of miles within a single generation. Neanderthals remained isolated, meaning that if a brilliant hunter invented a better spear point, the technology died with his small family group. If a sapiens group faced a localized famine, they could rely on their neighbors for support. They could also gather dozens of warriors from neighboring bands to launch a coordinated attack on a rival group. A Neanderthal clan was not just fighting a sapiens hunting party, they were fighting an entire network of allied families. Sapiens also used art, cave paintings, and musical instruments to create a shared cultural identity that allowed complete strangers to cooperate. A sapiens hunter could walk into a foreign camp, show a carved bead necklace, and immediately be welcomed as a brother. Neanderthals simply did not have this level of social organization, leaving them isolated and outnumbered in the struggle for territory. But the story of these two species is not just a tale of endless warfare and violence. For decades, scientists believed that sapiens simply wiped out the Neanderthals through violent conquest. But in 1997, geneticists managed to sequence the Neanderthal genome, and the results changed our understanding of human history forever. These early mating events occurred as early as 60,000 years ago in the Middle East, long before sapiens successfully colonized the rest of Europe. They discovered that if you trace your ancestry outside of Africa, your DNA contains between 2 and 4% Neanderthal genes. This means that when our ancestors met Neanderthals, they did not just fight, they also mated. The two species interacted, shared technology, and exchanged genes over thousands of years. Some of the Neanderthal genes we carry today affect our keratin proteins, helping us grow thicker hair and nails to protect against the cold. Other genetic variants from Neanderthals influence our circadian rhythms, helping our ancestors adapt to the short winter days and long summer nights of the north. However, some of these inherited traits, like increased blood clotting, were beneficial in the ancient world to heal wounds quickly, but can cause health issues in modern sedentary lifestyles. The Neanderthal genes we inherited actually helped our ancestors survive, providing immunity to northern diseases and giving us skin adaptations for colder climates. So, the Neanderthals did not truly lose a war of extermination. Instead, their small, isolated populations were slowly absorbed into the much larger, faster-growing populations of Homo sapiens. Their physical traits were diluted over generations until their distinct skeletal features disappeared. They did not vanish from the earth, they simply became a part of us. So, who would win a fight? In a one-on-one cage match with no weapons, the Neanderthals' crushing strength would easily dismantle a Homo sapiens in seconds. But humans do not survive in cages, and we do not fight alone. Homo sapiens won the evolutionary war because of our throwing arms, our fuel-efficient metabolisms, and our massive social networks. We chose brains, range, and cooperation over raw muscle, and that choice allowed us to inherit the Earth. If you want to see who won the fight, you do not need to look at fossils, you just need to look in the mirror. Could you have survived 1 week in the Ice Age alongside these muscular human giants? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Until next time, stay bold.